Let's get ready to rumble!
I was listening to Bob Arum, and he was a little pessimistic at the prospect of Spence versus Crawford actually happening. He said, yes, a lot of people are interested in the fight, but that doesn't necessarily turn into pay-per-view buys. And the piracy has come up quite a lot. That representative from the PBC was talking that people are going to steal the fight. What I don't get though, right? Canelo, Triple G is signed and it's ready to go on DAZN pay-per-view, and they're not worried about people stealing the fight. Why is it coming up with the PBC, and even with Bob Arum mentioning it with Top Rank, but DAZN are not concerned about it? Why is Sky paying out $28 million, $35 million if you're listening to Frank Warren? Why would they pay that out for the Usyk Joshua rematch with the threat of streams eating into their bottom line, illegal streams? Are they saying, and I'm just putting the suggestion out there because it has to be put out there to move the discussion on, is Bob Arum and Tim Smith saying that the Terence Crawford fans and the Errol Spence fans, the PBC fans, or as Doug Fisher called them, the demographic, are they too cheap to support their fighter that they herald so high and want to tell us that he's taken over from Canelo? Well, if he's taken over from Canelo, why don't they have confidence that his fans will not steal the stream? You know, the other day we was arguing which was the bigger fight, Triple G Canelo 3 or Crawford versus Spence. Well, you're worried about people stealing the stream. You're worried about that. If it was that big a fight, you won't be worried. Because if you sell 1 million pay-per-view buys, you don't give a shit if some people stole the stream. You really don't care. If you're selling 600,000 pay-per-view buys, you don't give a shit if a few people stole the stream. We have to keep this real. You know, I made several videos about what A-side means, because a lot of these kids, they think they know what it means. A-side, let's talk this A-side. Tim Smith said the fight's not happening because Terence Crawford is not a draw. Well, why would that matter if you're an A-side fighter? An A-side fighter can cover his huge purse and his B-side opponent's purse. It shouldn't matter that Terence Crawford can draw. You guys are saying Spence is this big star, so it shouldn't matter. All the true A-side fighters weren't worried if their B-side opponent could pull their weight to either fill the gate up or pay-per-view numbers. You can go through all the A-side the real A-side fighters. You do the research. I ain't doing all the work and then give you all the answers as well. You want to argue? Do the research first, then argue. If he's the A-side fighter, there's got to be something that he wants from Crawford. And it's obviously not Crawford's cash cow status, because he doesn't have that. So what does he want from Crawford? Possibly his number 1 or 2 pound for pound consensus ranking. His WBO belt to complete the whole set and become undisputed. These are the things that the A-side will pay a B-side fighter for. Like Joshua paid Joseph Parker $8 million for that WBO belt he had. $8 million. He paid Charles Martin $5 million for that IBF belt. Klitschko, that was a vacant belt, but $15 mil for the WBA belt. That's what A-side fighters do. What's the incentive? If there's no incentive there, there's no need to pay. I mean, Parker wasn't mandated to fight Anthony Joshua. This is something Eddie and Joshua decided to do. They wanted that WBO belt to solidify his unified status. Parker could probably string a few numbers together in New Zealand, but he's not a draw in the UK. Charles Martin couldn't sell out a shoebox. It's not like Joshua needed them to be a draw and help sell the gate or the pay-per-view. No, he wanted the belts. Now, Klitschko, he started the stadium thing for Joshua, didn't he? He brought value. So much so, they had to get the mayor, Sadiq, to approve a crowd of 90,000 from the original projected gate of 80,000 or so. Klitschko and Joshua shared around 15 mil each. And maybe a little more after the pay-per-view upside, because it done a bag load of pay-per-view. 15 mil were their guarantees. How much does Spence want to be undisputed champion? How much does he want Crawford's consensus 1 or 2 pound for pound ranking? How much does he want these things? We'll see if he's an A-side fighter. The A-side fighter, a real A-side fighter, a real promoter who knows he's got an A-side fighter and a network who know they have an A-side fighter, they will pay the B-side fighter 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 times what he's ever earned. Why? Because it's an investment. They know that their A-side fighter, once he beats you, will be able to triple and double his earnings, his pay-per-view revenue will go up, his endorsements and sponsorships will go up, and everything. But if you're not an A-side fighter, then they're not going to put that money in there. That's how you know if someone is an A-side fighter or not. Now, that's a valuable lesson you have there. Yeah? No one's broke it down like that on YouTube because there's too many fanboys who want to say you sell a few 100,000, you're an A-side fighter. No, you are not. If he was an A-side fighter, the fight would have been made. Same with Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia. You don't have to bring 40% or equal financial value to the table. Just bring your strap and your pound-for-pound ranking and your impressive record, and the machine behind the A-side fighter will do the rest. You know, like, there is a demographic of American boxing fans who like talking up Spence, or like talking up the Spence and Crawford fight, how big it is. They like talking up how big Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis is. But if they're going to steal Spence's stream, they're going to steal Tank's stream. Is that why they don't want to make the fight? Is that why they don't want to pay any names to come over there and fight Tank? So we keep hearing how big Tank is. We keep hearing how big Errol is, how big this is and how big that is. But yet, we're still stuck on zero. With Tim Smith saying they're going to steal the stream. Terence Crawford ain't a star. It's not that big a fight. We're still stuck with major promoters like Bob Arum chiming in saying, well, unless somebody subsidizes the fight, I don't see it happening. But who's going to do it? The PBC said they had $50 million for Canelo to fight a few names on that side of the street. But they can't fork out 10, 20 million to get Crawford and Spence on the road? Why won't the Saudis bankroll fights across the pond like Spence versus Crawford, Garcia versus Tank? I often wonder why. Now, I think Tank versus Ryan Garcia, I think if the PBC just allowed DAZN to handle it, it would happen. DAZN would put the money behind it. And whether they take a loss or whether they make it a success, they'll put it on. They would do it in a heartbeat. The problem is, though, Showtime and Steven Espinosa are not willing to let DAZN have that big fight. They're not willing to do that. Whether DAZN lose money on it or not, they're not willing to give it away. They're not willing to let fighters to breathe on the other side of the street. And Al Heyman is committed to keeping Steven Espinosa and the executives at Showtime happy. That could be one of the reasons they do so few cross-promotional fights with their best talent. The problem with that, though, is when the rival promoter and network submit and say, okay, our fighter will go over to your side of the street. They don't make the fight, yeah? They don't make a counter offer to what DAZN or maybe a top-ranked ESPN or any other network put out there. They don't do nothing. And then you still got fanboys running around, oh, yeah, well, yeah, we're doing this and doing it. No, you're doing nothing. The bottom line is, I'll say it again, whoever makes the highest bid is where the fight should go if there's any confusion of what network the fight should be on and who should be promoting it. Highest bid. That's how boxing's always did it. Once again, do the research. Every negotiation should be approached like a purse bid, even if a sanctioning body is not involved. Bob Arum was talking about the robust numbers that the UK pay-per-views does, and he says the pricing has a lot to do with it. Bob was being diplomatic, saying it's not his show, so he doesn't want to interfere and say they should do this and do that. So he's being diplomatic, but he was basically saying that, yo, these guys ain't a big draw, not neither Crawford or Spence. You've got to lower the threshold. I've never heard that about Canelo, Sugar Ray Leonard, Tyson, Holyfield. We got to lower the threshold. De La Hoya, Pacquiao, never heard it. Not in their prime, no. Bob, he took a long way to get round to saying the guarantees that Crawford and Spence are looking for are probably not in tune with what they can generate upside of the PPV revenue. And he was talking about potentially lowering the cost of the pay-per-view to what, $30? I've heard people who support PBC fighters saying they like paying high prices for pay-per-view. They've literally been arguing that. And a lot of them who are saying that, they don't even purchase the pay-per-view. A lot of them are saying that because they're picking a side, the PBC side in this PBC versus DAZN supposed war. How do I know they're not buying the pay-per-views? Because look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. None of them coming close to what a Mayweather or a Prime Oscar would generate. Or Canelo. That's how I know. The A-side argument is the kiss of death to a cross-promotion. Especially if the fighters are not A-side fighters. You've got their fans, you've got their media hyping them up, gassing them up. And these fighters start believing they're entitled to purses that the pay-per-view numbers are saying no. This doesn't add up. You need someone to subsidize these fights because you yourself cannot generate enough money to cover your purse or your opponent's. Let's remember, Crawford, what was he earning? 4 mil a fight on Top Rank? You see, people think they can call Spence an A-side fighter over Crawford because he can sell a couple more 100,000 pay-per-view than him. That doesn't necessarily make him an A-side fighter. It really just means he sells more pay-per-view than Terence. That's all that means. An A-side fighter is like when Marcus Maidana fights Floyd Mayweather and we've never seen him in a ring since after the second fight because he earned so much. Or any of Anthony Joshua's opponents. The money they've earned, like Andy Ruiz, Usyk, etc., etc. It's the lottery fight for most heavyweights, apart from the PBC ones. It's the lottery fight. The reason it's not the lottery fight for the PBC ones is because of network politics between the likes of Espinoza and DAZN and Eddie Hearn, etc., etc. But it was the lottery fight for Charles Martin who was on PBC because that's before all that shit started between Wilder and Joshua, between Espinoza and Eddie, etc., etc. How much did Charles Martin make?
6 million.
He's never made that money since. He hasn't come close to making a purse like that since. And he's fought Luis Ortiz on pay-per-view, Adam Karanaki, Gerald Washington. He's fought all of them except Wilder. The only fighter that Wilder has made life-changing money is Tyson Fury. And I guess you could sneak Luis Ortiz in there, but nothing compared to what Joshua was offering Ortiz on short notice. I mean, Luis Ortiz made 1.5 in a rematch with Wilder. Wilder made 3 million. In the first fight, Ortiz made 500,000. Wilder made 2.1. So Wilder isn't, like, okay, Ortiz, you could call that life-changing money for Ortiz, but not comparable to AJ's opponents. Nothing comparable. Wilder even said, they're offering me more money to fight Joshua than they were Tyson Fury. He told Tyson Fury that. So there ain't no hitters like that at the PBC who can do that for opponents. That's why Leonard Ellerby said, we're not bringing this guy over here, we're not bringing them, and we're not paying them all that money to fight Tank. But until you do pay them elite fighters what they're due, Tank is a fraud. And I hate saying it because I like him as a fighter, but he's a fraud. You got to pay up, you got to do what Eddie did with Charles Martin. You can say Charles Martin, yeah, whatever. Eddie put up the 5 million for AJ to get in the game. That's what you call betting on yourself. That's betting on yourself. Not all this other bullshit that people have been talking about. That's betting on yourself, Let's remember when Wilder was coerced by Richard Schaefer, Shelley Finkel, and Steven Espinoza, and Lou DiBella lost his job as a result because he wanted Wilder to take that DAZN deal. Lennox Lewis said he should have took the money, right? Showtime paid him $10 million to cushion the blow for turning down all that money from DAZN. And then after that, they weren't willing to bankroll the Luis Ortiz fight, the rematch, was they? Nah, that went back on Fox. And Wilder even briefly fell out with them guys over there. I picked 2 random fights for Joshua. His opponents made 8 million, Joseph Parker. 15 million, Vladimir Klitschko. In fact, Luis Ortiz he didn't. He wasn't scared to fight Joshua. His management screwed up a $5 million purse for Ortiz on short notice before Andy Ruiz came in. Right? $5 million is more than what Luis Ortiz earned in 2 fights with Deontay Wilder. The first one was pay-per-view, 500,000. And if anyone thinks he got 4 million on the upside of the pay-per-view, then you're drunk. You're of the same mentality that Wilder didn't take the DAZN deal because they didn't promise him Joshua. You know, they were going to give him 120 million to fight Kawanaki, Luis Ortiz, Dominic Brazil. They were going to give him 120 million for them 3 fights. When them 3 fights on the PBC couldn't even generate 20 million altogether. Trust me, DAZN weren't throwing money out like that. I'm going to make what might appear to be a bizarre statement. The PBC, if they were to lower their pay-per-view prices, let's say Spence versus Crawford versus Triple G versus Canelo 3, capitalism has got a lot of people in a way that if they're not spending money, they don't feel important. And if they're spending £80 on a pay-per-view and we're spending 30, a lot of people are saying, well, there must be something wrong with that pay-per-view. I'm not going to pay that. It must be a crap fight, a crap event. I hope, as a species, as humans, we're not as stupid as that. But I have my doubts. People might look at it as an inferior event because they've had to lower the price of it. Why do you think designer labels are so successful? And why branding is so important nowadays? The casual boxing fan, that market may well look at it as simple as what I'm saying it. If it's that cheap, it can't be that good. Because Bobby's suggesting that Crawford and Spence lower their pay-per-view price. But Canelo and Triple G are not going to do that. So let's say they fight, let's say a month within each other. Canelo's selling his pay-per-view for $70 or whatever. Spence and Crawford are selling theirs for $30. And Canelo does $600,000 at $70. Spence and Crawford do $400,000 at $30. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. If they were going to lower the pay-per-view price, this is something that should have happened before HBO went out of business. They should have done it back then, or even before that. With the emerging illegal stream culture, they should have took action then. In the UK, the prices haven't really shifted that much since 1995 when we had our first pay-per-view. That was Bruno versus Tyson 2. Prices haven't really shifted. How much was that? That was maybe $10.99. I believe the people who illegally stream, even if it's a fight they really want to see, you could reduce it to $5 and they're still illegally streaming it. Because that's just who they are. They don't see the value in purchasing anything if they can get it for free. Bob raised some interesting points. He said bringing the pay-per-view pricing back down to $20 to $25. And he said that's what they started with in America. We started at £10.99 in England. Tyson and Bruno too. Fury versus Wright was £30, $29.99. Probably going to be $29.99 for AJ versus Usyk too. 27 years later, we're paying £20 more than what we did for Tyson and Bruno. In all fairness, America was doing pay-per-view before the UK, so perhaps the inflation fluctuations are a little different to the UK. But they're paying at least, how much? £50 or £60 more? How much were they charging for Luis Ortiz versus Charles Martin or Barrios versus Keith Thurman? I think America needs to take some kind of action quickly because there is a culture that is rapidly developing over there of talking about fights but not making them. And Golden Boy probably should have gagged Ryan Garcia from coming out saying he's going to make the Tank fight and getting everybody's expectations up. People are going to say, you were just clout chasing off each other. You're not serious about making the fight. And this all adds into that culture of talking too much about fights but not making them. And here is something, if you're an American boxing fan, that you might not want to come to terms with, but you got to think about this. If American fighters, African American, Mexican American, but born on American soil, and we're talking about cross-promotion fights because the two fights they're talking about, Garcia versus Tank, Spence versus Crawford, well, that's not cross-promotion no more. But it was for a long time. But they haven't got Crawford's signature, and I think that's throwing them off as well. But if fights are not being made and people are bringing up, he doesn't sell, they're going to steal the streams and stuff like that, then you have to say that boxing as a sport in your country has fell off a long way behind the traditional sports, let's say, gridiron, basketball, baseball. It's fell off. They're not good enough reasons for the boxing fans, at least, that these fights are not being made. And we have to start questioning if America is the same superpower in boxing that it was before Mayweather retired. Now, if they announce the fight, you can come in here and start talking smack. I don't mind, because I get to see the fight. But the truth is, you can't say Eddie Hearn is involved and he's messing it up, or Bob Arum. This is on you. This is all on the PBC to get Crawford and Spence over the line. But when we see things like Keith Thurman popping up as #1 contender for the WBC, and that's the only PBC welterweight who's held straps recently that Spence hasn't faced. So now he's ran through Porter, Garcia, Ugas, and perhaps they thought this Stanionis, we're not going to really pull that one off. Perhaps we could recycle Keith Thurman, bring him from the wilderness and give him a shot at Spence. And then we'll tackle the Crawford equation later. Maybe he might lose and we don't have to bother with it at all. I guarantee you, Thurman will get the shot before Boots Ennis. He's ranked #1 with one of them sanctioning bodies that everyone's got a strap for. Boots has that thing where he's not quite PBC, but is sort of PBC. Looking forward to the Chris Billiam Smith, Isaac Chamberlain main event on Saturday. Looking forward to it. I want to big up Everything Boxing. He brings together a lot of information and makes it a little easier for channels like myself to select the topics that I'm going to talk about. And he astutely tweeted, "I thought it was hard to fight on Sky. TBA has landed 5 slots on a 9-fight card, meaning the likes of Joe Pigford is still waiting for her to be announced. Fraser Clark is waiting for her to be announced. Hassan Azim, same thing. Mikael Lawal, a cruiserweight who I like to watch, he has a to be announced. And Lee Cutler has a to be announced. Now the question is why are they struggling to get opponents in, or so many opponents in, that they have 5 to be announced on a 9-fight card? 5. What is it? Boxers just don't want the paydays, or a lot of them just don't fancy fighting right now? Has the level of journeyman just dipped a little? Have a lot of boxers actually put down the gloves since the pandemic, when the work dried up, and just haven't returned to the ring? Someone asks Adam Smith what that's all about, or Ben Shalom. And sometimes, no, not sometimes, a lot of times for a lot of promoters around the world, it just comes down to damage limitation, basically, because they're often left in a position where they have to work with what they're left. Like Eddie on the Chisora Pulev 2 undercard. Felix Cash had to withdraw from his fight with Vaughn Alexander, stomach virus. And then Kingsley Ibe, a way better opponent for Fabio Wardley than the substitute Chris Healy. He had visa issues to get in the country. So that was 2 fights that went by the wayside. Chris Healy shouldn't have been in the ring. Let's keep it real. No disrespect to Chris. Glad he got a payday. Glad he didn't get hurt. But he shouldn't have been in the ring. He's not at that level that he should have been in the ring. There's just no way. They shouldn't have allowed him in the ring. The British Boxing Board of Control shouldn't have allowed Chris Healy in the ring. He didn't look in condition to fight. He didn't look like he was training for another fight and this opportunity came along. It didn't look like that. What were they going to do? Withdraw another fight? They wasn't exactly going to get a replacement for Vaughn Alexander. I mean, he was the visitor. If it was the other way around and he pulled out, they would have probably worked hard to get Felix Cash a late replacement. But they're not going to do that for Vaughn Alexander. And they didn't want to have 2 fights scrapped on the card. I hope for the Boxer XX fighters who have to be announced that their fights don't get scrapped. I hope that don't happen to none of them, because it's frustrating for the boxer. They need to be active. And they want to get paid too. They want to get paid. But I've got to be a realist. With 5 days to go, 5 Sky boxers looking for opponents, the level of opposition they're going to get in at this late notice leads to a lot of potential mismatches, which is no good for the broadcaster, for the boxer, or nobody. Not for the consumer, for nobody. Let's keep it real. The likes of Ben Whittaker, Caroline Dubois, and Joe Pigford, they all have opponents lined up. A lot of people are looking forward to see what Ben Whittaker brings on his debut. Caroline Dubois already looks pretty advanced. It's a shame that Fraser Clark couldn't get an opponent who had a little more notice in, because they're fast-tracking Fraser as well. And a 20-second blowout or a 2-minute blowout, too easy fight paths for Frazier. Not what we're really looking for. We want somebody who can take his shots, at least for a round or two maybe, defend a little, and give Frazier a little run out. At least. And you know I'm supporting Frazier because he has that Jamaican blood.
You're so pussy over there. Yeah. That's why the blood clot y'all burn down yours.
This is a very good fight. Isaac Chamberlain only has one loss to Lawrence Okoli. Chris Billiam Smith only has one loss to Richard Riakporhe. Both losses were in points for either man. Commonwealth and European titles are on the line. Both of them titles are owned by Chris Billiam Smith. He headlines in front of his Bournemouth crowd, Bournemouth International Centre, so it will be a very good crowd. I don't know if he fills it out. He should do. He should do because he was asking for this. Eddie Hearn and DAZN weren't going to deliver that for him, so Sky, they stepped in. He's still on good terms with Eddie, but this could be the start of a fruitful relationship with him and Sky. Isaac Chamberlain, this opportunity fell on his lap after years in the wilderness. He signed to Mick Hennessy, and the little tenure they had on Channel 5 didn't bring Isaac any of the big fish at Cruiser. But now Mick has a partnership, let's say, with Sky, with Boxer XX. Isaac gets an opportunity. I think a few knowledgeable punters may look at the odds and see if Isaac is worth a few quid to cause an upset. I think it's a tough one to pick, actually. And I'm not going to go through with a prediction because I'm not really sure who wins it. And then when one of them wipes the other out, I say, oh man, how come I didn't see that? But that's boxing. Isaac Chamberlain, 6'2", 78-inch reach, 14 wins, 8 stoppages, 1 defeat to Lawrence Okoli. Chris Billiam Smith, 6'3". His reach is not listed on BoxRec, but he's a big cruiser. Gave Riakporhe a battle. 15 wins, 11 inside the distance, 1 loss. So, a few more stoppages than Isaac. I'm actually going to swing for Chris Billiam Smith. Maybe because I just saw that statistic there, and I believe he has fought the harder competition in the last couple of years, and he is champion. He's with Shane McGuigan, looks a little bigger than Isaac, and with Bournemouth backing him, he has a lot to fight for. And Isaac has a lot to fight for because a second loss doesn't write him off. It feels like Isaac's been around a long time, but he's only 28 years of age. Billiam Smith is 31. A second loss for Isaac, it's a long way back. And it depends what kind of loss it is as well. I think this main event has been a little slept on, but it's a decent card. I like this card for Sky. I like this card.